Welcome to the Superstar Communicator podcast. My name is Susan Heaton-Wright, a leading impact, speaking and communications expert. My aim is to show you how to make an impact so you will be heard, listened to and respected for career success. Listen weekly to the podcast and go to our website, superstarcommunicator.com.
Ready.
Hello everybody, this is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator. As you know, listeners, I love to interview people who are the very best talent. And on the other end of the internet today, we have the most amazing person who's called Dr Marcia Morgan. She is a British Caribbean woman. She is married with children and works for Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service and is a senior lecturer at the University of East London. Marcia volunteers as a race ambassador and social mobility ambassador for the Ministry of Justice, advocating for the application of an intersectional approach to staff data analysis. She's also a level 7 qualified executive coach and mentor. She lives in East Sussex and London. And the reason why I was particularly keen to talk to her was because she has recently published a book called The Silenced Voice. And this is all about spoken communication. So welcome, Marcia.
Hi.
It's just lovely to have you on here. And for those people who are listening, Marcia is wearing the most gorgeous blouse. Just tell us where it's from.
Well, my blouse is made by Grassfields, which is an African-based designer who can be found on the internet. And my earrings are made by TM Boutiques. Again, they can be found online. And I'm just there promoting Black Pound. So whenever I'm being interviewed, I ensure that I wear something that is made by Black designers and creators.
Brilliant. Remember that, listeners, and those people that are watching the video. So tell me a little bit about the book that you have just written.
Well, The Silenced Voice, There is Purpose in Pain is a book that is a combination of poetry, narrative, and analysis to help readers understand the journey of a Black woman practitioner researcher. It's also there to encourage people who feel invisible, excluded, and othered in the workplace and also in academia to feel that they are not alone. Because I've had the experience of being feeling invisible. I decided to do my PhD in the first place because I recognized that there were no Black women in prison occupational literature. There was this image of an axiomatic white male prison officer where Black women were just negated. And for that reason, I took on that audacious journey of completing a doctorate that placed Black women at the center of the analysis in order to make them feel visible. So this book is my second book, but this book was to help everyday readers understand the feelings, the experiences, what it's like to be invisible and othered because of the intersectionality of gender and race. But I was very conscious that the term intersectionality is a new term, more or less, and a lot of people don't fully understand it. So the purpose of the poetry is to help people feel what that means so that they can then relate to it and understand.
That is so powerful. How often have we felt as though we're invisible? And I can't walk in your shoes because I'm a white woman, but I'm trying to understand, like our mutual friend Mindy, we are allies and we're trying to understand day by day and be educated by amazing people like you to understand what it's like to walk in your shoes. And do you feel that it's people from different communities that are reading your book?
Yeah, I mean, what's been very interesting is I had my book launch on the 18th of September, and I had people from the Caribbean, from America, and from Europe, as well as England, taking part in that. And the whole point of the book is that it's not necessarily about gender and race, it's about that feeling of invisibility.
Yes.
And one of the things that I try to push with intersectional identities is that we all are made up of multiple identities that
Yes.
can either make us feel part of a group or excluded from a group. But those feelings transcend across ethnicity, across race, across gender, because feelings of invisibility, othered, and excluded are quite painful feelings, and we all experience pain at some point in our life journey.
Now, you talk about invisibility and otherness. What do you mean by otherness?
Well, I use the term otherness as in when you are compared to another group and then you are treated as though you are deviant. So if we use, for example, the term BAME, which is a term that's generating a lot of debate at the moment, the term BAME doesn't exist. It's not a person, it's just a term that's used to apply to anyone who's non-white, which then psychologically makes you feel as though you are othered, you are different to a dominant group. And then with the term minority, again, makes you feel as though you are less than, you are not good enough. And that's what othered means.
Okay, thank you. I hadn't come across that term before, and I'm sure that other listeners won't have done before. I think that's a really interesting point, because when people talk about minorities or making sure that there is more diversity, women are put into that category, yet we are the majority, the more than 50% of the country's population are women. It's odd, isn't it?
It is very odd, and it's very odd how what you find sometimes is the term women is sometimes synonymous to white women, and then black women are left out. So, for example, if we look at the civil service, we have something like over 50% of senior civil servants are white women, but the term women is used to generalize women, but yet we know that black women are not part of that 52+%. So it's very important the terminology that we use that can sometimes make people feel part of or excluded when we kind of synonymize certain words to certain groups depending on the context.
So what can I do as a white woman to make sure that you are included in the conversation?
It's being fully aware of the language that is being used, taking that time out to listen to people from different groups and backgrounds and perspective, not generalizing people, so not making the assumption that every black person has the same story or can represent a particular cultural group. I'm of British Caribbean heritage. My experience will be very different, for example, from someone who is British African heritage
Yes.
or Britain Eastern Asian. So it's very important to understand that we all have our unique experiences. And as an ally, it's taking the time out to understand, get to know, communicate, talk, develop relationships that are mutually respectful and open, being open to have conversations and to get to know each other.
Now, one of my business friends, he works in the diversity area within a large organization, and he had a conversation with one of the black ladies that works for him, and they had a very open conversation, and she said, you know, you're the first person that's actually acknowledged that I'm black, because most of my colleagues say, oh, you're just like us. But actually, and what are your feelings about that? Because as an ally, I would be trying to say, look, we're all the same, to try and be inclusive. But clearly that flagged up something, and it's something I'm thinking about now to make sure I don't make that mistake.
Yeah, I think that it's not about sameness. Even twins are not exactly the same. We all have our individual identity. We all have our individual experiences. We all have our different perceptions. And these are what make us as people, as unique as individuals. So it's not about sameness. It's about one opportunity and equity, ensuring that each individual has the same opportunities to excel in whatever field they're in. It's also, if we talk about being respectful, it's about accepting people's differences and not making assumptions. So, for example, sometimes people say, I treat everyone how I want to be treated. Well, you might want to be treated differently to someone else.
Yes.
So, for example, you may go to a party and you like meat and fish, but you may have vegetarians there. So if you're saying I'm catering for everyone based on what I like, then you'll automatically exclude someone who is different to you.
So really, we need to listen to each other so that we can really, really understand.
That's very important. And being open, because sometimes we might hear messages that we don't like or might make us feel uncomfortable. But then that's where introspection is very important. Think about why what that person is saying or doing makes you feel uncomfortable. Because in that process, you're actually learning about yourself as well as you're learning about somebody else.
Really, really good points here. I always ask my podcast guests for 3 top tips. Now, in your case, I would really appreciate it if you could give us as allies 3 top tips in how we can be better allies.
I guess the 3 top tips would be: 1, know yourself. You need to be comfortable with, for example, your white privilege in order to be an ally. Because if you constantly feel defensive or inadequate, then how can you then be an ally to anyone else? So know yourself. Be prepared to have conversations with different types of people. But when you're having those conversations, listen to what's being said, not just hear what's being said, but actually listen and reflect back on it. Can I relate to this? Does this make sense to me? How am I feeling? Because a lot of the time we try to ignore how we feel, but our emotions actually affect the way we react. So, for example, we may be listening and saying, yes, I agree with what you're saying, but your face might be saying something else. So it's very important to understand that when you're listening, what's the impact is that having on me in how I'm reacting or responding to another person? And then I guess thirdly is just be open, be supportive in whatever way that might be. It could be a case of just listening to someone. It could be doing joint projects with somebody. It's very important not to expect, for example, Black people to have all the answers or to soothe your individual ego or how you're feeling. You have to take responsibility for your own actions and not rely on somebody else to make you feel comfortable in that particular space.
Well, thank you for those. Certainly that's something that I'm going to take on board, to be a better ally. I'm trying my best, and Mindy and I are trying our best. One thing that you did mention was white privilege. I can't change the way that I look. And you also talked about everybody being an individual. There are some white people that I know that have also had very challenging times. And I think that what's your opinion about this? Because my feeling is that we've got to understand everybody and where they come from and
That's
what their
correct.
history is.
Yeah, and I think privilege is not necessarily, you have white privilege and you have other types of privilege. So, for example, in the context of what's going on at the moment in relation to white privilege, we know that white privilege automatically discriminates against other groups. So, for example, if we look in our workplaces, we can see that there are certain practices. So, for example, the boys' club is a term that people would use. When managers are interviewing people, for example, you will see that the panel generally in certain grades will be predominantly white. People tend to then recruit people of their own reflection. That's where white privilege, for example, plays a part. Within a civil service, we are looking at having more diverse panels. So we have panels that are made up of different people from different ethnic groups and different backgrounds. And therefore, it will then reduce the likelihood of people being promoted or appointed based on the dominant group's image.
Yes.
But then we have to remember, when I use the term intersectionality, and why I think it's really important, is that privilege, the same part of your identity can actually create privilege and can actually cause discrimination. An example of this, for example, when I've worked in prisons, as a Black woman who is employed, I have more privilege than a Black female prisoner because I'm employed, I have the keys, I can leave. But yet there are times when we will both experience discrimination within that context because of our shared gender and race. But because of my occupation status, I have more privilege than a Black female prisoner. So the term privilege and how it's used, it's in relation to power relations, and it depends in the context in
Yes.
which the same identity can actually create privilege and actually make you feel uncomfortable or create oppression and discrimination.
That's a really, really good view of that, because I'm sure that there are situations where we have both had to deal with what you call white privilege, where you've got somebody, a very powerful white man, that has perhaps discriminated against you and me, and those are very difficult situations. But I'm sure that I understand it's far more difficult for you as a Black woman. There are additional barriers that you have to overcome in that situation.
Yeah, and that's where the intersectionality plays a crucial part in that area of privilege, in discrimination and oppression. Because like I've said, it's about power relations and the context in which whatever it is being played out. So for example, you may enter an arena where it's predominantly African Caribbean people, and then your white privilege now makes you feel uncomfortable. So you no longer have that feeling of privilege, you have that feeling of discomfort. So it is also about context.
Yes.
But if we're talking about organizations and life chances, it's very complex. It's not as simple as it can only be A or B or
Yes.
white or Black. And that's where the sort of the constructionist aspect of intersectionality plays a part. We have the issue of, say, North and South divides. It's very complex. It's being aware of all of that.
I went to university, to Durham University, and that the students that were around when I was there were mainly, excuse me, they were mainly from upper middle class, privately educated, and here I was from Birmingham, even though, yeah, you get it. And my friends and I had a couple of friends that were also from the same school. There were some people that thought that we were just from an alien country somewhere, and it's not as obvious because of course I looked like them, but I absolutely get what you mean about feeling like an outsider, even though you and I, in the roles that we have or where we have been in our lives, we have been there because we're good enough.
Yeah. And that's where I use the term space invaders, because you go into a space where you feel as though you're invading that space because of a particular aspect of your identity that is not the norm or is different to the majority of that group.
And quite often the powerful people are the noisiest people, even if they're in the minority, interestingly enough. I know that Jonathan Coe, the writer, he's from Birmingham as well. He went to Cambridge University, and you know, he turned up there and was bombarded by all of these Eton and Harrow people. And for the next term, he said that he hid in his room, and then slowly he came out of his room and discovered lots of other people that were equally horrified, who were equally amazing people. And then they made firm friendships. But you saw that extreme. Yes. Are you okay? Did you hear that?
No, sorry. Can you repeat that?
Oh, okay. All right. So I was saying about the writer Jonathan Coe, who wrote The Rockers Club, which actually features my old school. Oh, it's gone funny.
I can hear you.
Yeah, there was some background noise. So yeah. Can you hear the background noise, the cracking?
No.
I don't know whether we should. let's see if it carries on. Yeah, Jonathan Coe, the writer who wrote The Rotters Club, and he tells the story of he went to Cambridge University, you know, there on merit, not door opening because he was at Eton. He'd got there by being fantastic. And he met all of these old Etonians that were, you know, really loud. And he hid in his room for the next term, and then slowly came out and discovered all of these fantastic people who were also hiding because they were horrified.
And that just shows the issue of how our various identities can make us feel uncomfortable in different spaces, because there you have a white male feeling uncomfortable, not feeling part of that space because of the class difference.
Yeah,
so
and one of the things that he gets really cross about it is that a lot of the publicity about his work, always a working class boy from Birmingham, and he said, no, I'm not, but they, yeah. But I know that there's been quite a lot of talk about more Black students going to Cambridge University. And I think that that's a good thing, because that's a reflection of our society, that we have a more balanced reflection on the different identities within. Sorry, there's this background noise. Can you hear it?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay, all right. I'll have to, hopefully it will come out in the editing. But I wonder if when a Black person goes to Cambridge, is it so challenging for them, or does there need to be some more support to help those students once they've arrived at Cambridge?
Well, I think that the experience at Cambridge is no different to the experiences in many organisations or universities. What you find in the majority of universities across England and Wales is that African Caribbean students are in the minority, and they do feel excluded. I know from my own journey of going to 3 different universities, I felt as though I had lectures where I was the only Black female in the lecture theatre. I had conversations with supervisors where they had suggested, well, you can't focus on that particular issue of race or ethnicity, not because it's not a good topic, but because they did not understand what I was trying to study. And I had to challenge that and sometimes argue, say, no, my piece of research is going to focus on this particular aspect. I've spoken to individuals who have been deterred from completing certain types of research that looked at issues of race and gender because their supervisors and their lecturers just don't understand it. So I think Cambridge is no different to any other academic institution in the country. I think what we need is more of our students that when they actually join university, they get that additional support.
Yes.
In regards to either mentoring and actually not even they need the support, but actually white lecturers need to understand their students. They need to be more open to being inclusive and not focusing on their own, well, I've studied this particular theorist, so you should follow that suit. No, you can't look at race because there's other issues. I think we also need more African Caribbean lecturers. I mean, I've lectured at the University of East London for a year, and a lot of my students felt quite empowered to have a Black female lecturer who was also using her own material, because I have an academic book, which is Black Women Prison Employees, Intersectionality of Gender and Race. I was able to use that as a teaching tool in my lectures with the students. That in itself was empowering, because they weren't focusing on sort of the Freuds and the Ericksons. It was, oh, you've got your own theory looking at the issues of strong Black women and organizational psychodynamics. Those things are what we need in all our universities, because then those students will feel as though they belong, they'll feel as though they're part of. But in all honesty, they're going through a journey that they will more than likely experience when they go into the workplace, because the workplace is quite similar to the education system.
Okay. Now, I remember back to when I was at university, I think there were only 2 female lecturers in the whole geography department, which had loads of lecturers. And I only, in the 3 years, I only had one female lecturer. And that's back, you know, in the 1980s. And
Yeah.
I can see that this is a similar journey for Black students now.
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, I graduated and completed my doctorate in 2016. I mean, one of the things that I pushed for that was very important for me when I was actually doing my doctorate was to have a supervisor. Well, that was the same reflection of me. So luckily for me, I had Dr. Gail Lewis, but I actually went out and approached her and asked her if she would be my supervisor, and then applied to the university, because my supervisor was more important to me than the university that I actually studied at, because I had to have someone who could understand the area that I wanted to research, but could also relate to some of the issues that would arise around being a Black female practitioner researcher, which I didn't feel that if I didn't have someone of the same reflection would actually be able to relate and understand to. So it was really important to have the right supervisor to support me through that journey.
You know, it's really interesting because obviously when we have a more diverse community and a more diverse conversation, seeing different people's perspectives on things is invaluable. Yet, from what you're saying, when you have somebody from a different background to you, when you're doing research, is obviously a disadvantage.
That's correct. I've mentored and coached individuals who have been in academia who have actually said, you know, I've had to I've decided not to follow through and do a PhD because I had to do my master's in an area that I wasn't interested in, because my supervisor said I had to study that particular area. I had to do my project in that field, but I really wanted to focus on, for example, ethnicity and offender learning. But I couldn't do that. I just had to focus on offender learning because that's what my supervisor said I could do. But yet we know that some supervisors don't understand the issues and the nuances in regards to ethnicity and learning or race, because they've never looked into that area. They can't relate to that area because of their issues of their white privilege. And that's why it's very important, I feel, to have someone that can understand different areas of study, because that's how you then contribute to theory and knowledge production. And even through my own journey, I was told you can't place Black women at the center of your analysis. You have to do a comparative study. And I would say, well, you can't do a comparative study if you're looking at the intersectionality of gender and race. But I had to argue that in order for people to understand that, no, you can't do a comparative, because that's where you othering Black women once again, and you're perpetuating the discourse that already exists.
You know, it does upset me that people that are in an advisory position aren't open enough to be able to think, well, actually, I could learn something here. We could have a good debate about this. No, I haven't done anything about race before, or ethnicity, but this is my opportunity to widen my perspective.
And that's where the issues of social defences come into play. And that's something that I examined in my own doctorate, because what will happen is individuals will feel uncomfortable looking at the issues of race, because then I have to think about my position in regards to white privilege, which I don't want to articulate or to acknowledge. So if I avoid supervising someone that's looking in an area of race and ethnicity, then I avoid that pain that I will then feel in regards to my own prejudices and my own white privilege and my own sort of thinking. And that's how the organizations and institutions perpetuate a certain type of discourse, because they then refuse to allow research in other areas that will then actually then make them have to question themselves as individuals who have that power to decide what people study or theorize about.
That's a real shame, isn't it?
A
real shame.
And that's one of the reasons why the UK is so far behind America, because we tend to have to rely a lot of in regards to theory around issues of race, ethnicity, gender from the American perspective, because our own scholars have been very reluctant to allow us to actually create that knowledge and that theory from a UK perspective.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. I think we've covered a huge amount today. And I'm hoping that the sound works. I'm going to have to work on this because there's some funny things going on today. Before we go, are we able to, how can people get in contact with you, read your book, find out more about the work that you're doing?
So I've got a website, which is www.black-women-amazons.com. I have a YouTube channel, which is Dr Marcia Morgan. I'm also on Twitter, which is Marcia T455. And I'm also on Instagram, which is _b_woman_A as well.
Okay, brilliant.
And I'm also on LinkedIn.
Oh, excellent. Well. We're linked on LinkedIn, aren't we?
Yeah.
And what I will do, listeners, is that I'll make sure that this is in the notes. And of course, all of those contacts will be in the transcript as well. Great. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Marcia?
I'd just like to say thank you for taking the time to invite me to your podcast and to allow me to sort of share my thoughts and perspectives in regards to how we can support each other in this journey that we're currently going through in regards to the Black Lives Matters, our issues with COVID, etc. I think it's really important that we diversify the conversation and we allow different voices to actually share a different perspective using our various platforms. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marcia. I'm incredibly grateful for your time and your expertise and your perspective, because of course it's different to mine. And listeners, let's just really think about this. Think about the other person, start to understand their perspective on these things, rather than thinking that we do understand already. So thank you very much, Marcia, and thank you, listeners. Until next time, this is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator. Thanks for listening. You have been listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and review the podcast on iTunes and on apps. Please contact us if you want to discuss any topic, could suggest a topic for us to include, or a guest who could come onto the podcast. Go to superstarcommunicator.com.